Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1. Why are there so many tech layoffs right now? We figured we would start with one of the more dire subjects, which is very real right now. So if you've been noticing the tech landscape, even since the start of 2023, we've had Salesforce that axed 10% of its global workforce, which was 8,000 employees. Amazon cut 3% or 10,000 of its office-based employees. Google eliminated 12,000 roles just last week. Microsoft cut 10,000 employees. And if you look at any stats, about 130,000 people have been laid off from tech in the past 12 months alone. So we just wanted to get into some of these topics around how we got here, what you can do. But before we get there, let's do a quick roundtable. My name is Keyur. I'm a manager at a company called Point Click Care. I've been a manager for about 6 years now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Louis, former engineering leader in a big corporation, ran a bunch of engineering teams. I recently turned entrepreneur, building my own stuff.
Hey, I'm Mithra. I'm currently an engineering leader at Pabe, which is a B2B SaaS startup, and trying a few things on the side as well, including this fun podcast.
Hey everyone, I'm Vic. I've been an engineering manager and director, and right now I'm back on the IC track as a principal engineer at Twilio. On nights and weekends, I find myself working on a couple side projects.
Hey folks, my name is Thiago. I'm currently Director of Engineering at Nubank. It's a fintech. And as pretty much everyone here, I also have some side hustles, but it's been mostly around posting everything that I learned over the last 15 years on Twitter and LinkedIn, trying to share as much as I can.
Let's get right into it. So one of the questions that often gets asked is, how did we get here? So tech, especially big tech, was always considered the epitome of all jobs, right? Once you get into any of the big FAANG companies, the word on the street was you could retire there. You would never have to leave your job. You would never get laid off. As long as you were performing at a decent level, you could spend your life there. Obviously, nobody's saying you would be complacent or slacking off, but as long as you did a good job, you had no reason to leave. But now there's a rude awakening with so many people being laid off. And this wasn't based on performance. So there are many people that are left without jobs that were high performers, that were putting in long hours, that were striving to keep the culture within their teams, but still found themselves locked out one morning. It shouldn't have to be this way, right? So maybe I'll open it up to see who wants to start on how we got here and what we can do to going forward. Go ahead, Mitra.
I think just to your first question of like, how did we get here? Something I've always been aware of and thought was really weird is how we would have hiring targets as numbers instead of jobs to be done or specific types of people that we wanted for roles. And I'm sure, we've all seen it, big companies and small, right? And we almost celebrate number of people we've hired or like how big a company is, the same way we celebrate big fundraising rounds, like bigger the number, the better it is, but it doesn't actually tell us anything about the company and how it's doing. And I think we're seeing all the repercussions now that we focused a lot on numbers. And now we've got to a point where, in all honesty, I think a lot of companies are using the recession as an excuse to do these layoffs. And they're saying, this is a trend, so we can just hop on it and we won't look that bad. But they're looking at, hey, we need to trim the fat because we have a lot of people who are maybe doing 50 or 75% of a job because they've just hired too many. And we could actually have half the people do the same amount of work. So I think tech has kind of created this situation. I have been through a layoff myself on both sides. So I see the emotions, I understand the stress around it all, but I do think it was almost an unavoidable thing that came up.
Amazing. The only other thing that I would add is they say about rebalancing, or imagine that every single company, especially every single big tech, has a quota, almost a percentage of their portfolio that they're allocating on, let's say, super stable products, super innovative things, right? And as the market changes, they need to rebalance, like what is the percentage of the portfolio that stays on stable, kind of well-known cash flow kind of business and more like bets, right? And what happened with Google, for example, I was listening to a podcast today. Someone was explaining that they're basically kind of like doing a measure. This is a theory, right? No one knows exactly the reason. They're basically doing a rebalance on the business areas and how much percentage-wise of employees each one of those represent. And the other thing here you mentioned that's really interesting, and I had not thought a lot about this, is about why are we seeing high performers being laid off, right? And the major reason, at least as far as I understand, is lawsuits. So the reason why companies avoid, let's say, doing a massive layoff on low performers is because that could, with a lot of lawsuits, and basically they try to use any other criteria, basically a location, an area, like a job title, to basically avoid lawsuits whenever they're doing all this like really sensitive stuff.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that's insightful. So maybe we can jump into, so letting go of one or two people on a team due to performance is very different from having to do a large scale layoff, right? And again, there are recent examples of how not to do it, like the Better.com CEO who said, if you're on this call, you're part of the unlucky group that is being laid off. Your employment is terminated effective immediately, and got off the Zoom call, right? So that shows no empathy. There is no thought that went into that, and that's just, at least feels like there was no emotion in it, right? Again, I know this is people's livelihood. There are families, there are stories behind every person. So there's no right way to do it. But assuming you as a manager know that this is coming to your teams, what are some of the steps you can take to either prepare yourselves better or prepare some of the folks on your team to be able to handle this better? Do you have any tips that you would share with your team members, or even prepare yourselves for that matter?
So I can go again. So one point about kind of like why are companies so harsh with layoffs, I think is all about risk, right? I think it's like whenever you have, I would say, a couple of people you're letting go, and just like either someone is leaving to a different job or a low performer that is really trustworthy, you kind of like, you're able to manage the risk. Okay, this is one person, there are thousands of employees. I mean, looking at the company side, is I see that they need to prepare this massive remove everyone access in case anyone tries to delete the databases or to do something crazy, right? So it's all about avoiding damage, I would say. But I mean, of course, there are 100 different ways of doing this, some more humane than others. But going back to the question out here about what can you do, I think the first thing that you can do as a manager or as an employee is to make sure you have an emergency fund. And that should be not only these seasons, right? These like macroeconomics crisis that we're seeing now. Ideally, throughout your career, after you establish yourself, after maybe 5 years or so, especially in tech, when you're making really good money, there's no excuse not have, let's say, 3 months, 6 months emergency fund.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what's a healthy runway? Is 3 months still enough in these days? Would you say?
I would say 6 months, but I mean, something is better than nothing, right? And the other thing is, the thing that we talk about a lot in the season one is about continuous interviewing. Basically, once a year, go out, test your skills, see the job offers you can get. Because especially at this time, the interview process is going to be a lot more strict. And if you have not done interviews in years, you're going to be in trouble, I would say. So I would say those two takeaways: emergency fund, skill-wise, make sure you're able to get offers even when you don't need. So during this time, if something bad happens, you still have that ability to take interviews and get to the end of the process.
Thank you, Thiago. Vic, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I want to go back to that previous question, right? About like, why do companies do layoffs? I think we've gotten to the point where it's really it's just imitative behavior. Companies are doing layoffs because their peer companies are doing layoffs. There's no good reason why, right? Google laid off a bunch of people. It's not going to increase their profitability by much. And they actually are still something like mid 2021 levels of layoffs. Like better.com that we talked about, the Zoom call. I mean, they laid people off because they actually needed to lay people off to become profitable, as opposed to something like Google and Meta, who are really laying people off because of investor pressure. Getting letters from investment funds that hold $45 billion that say you need to lay off people in order to become more profitable. And they're seeing that they're able to, trim the fat, I'm going to put that in air quotes, to get rid of a lot of people that they would not otherwise be able to under this whole guise of becoming profitable. So, and this, this disproportionately affects, your early career people, far more than it does a lot of other people. But yeah, why are they doing it? I mean, there's no like good math for why exactly it's happening. And I guess your other question was, what can managers do to help their team, right? I mean, I found, like, at least from talking to a lot of friends here, that the managers didn't even know that the layoffs were going to come in a lot of these cases. The managers were shielded. They ended up just kind of staying at the senior director level. So, I mean, as a manager, you can help position your team better, prepare them, but when they are so random, it's hard to really know exactly what you, a manager, could have done when, so many high performers and high performing teams are getting cut.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, one that comes to mind is usually managers don't know themselves. You're right. It's usually senior director or VP and above, depending on the size of the company. But this is something I've done personally. Managers can write letters of recommendation or agree to be references for their next interviews or a round of interviews, especially if you know them or if you work with them for a while, they are strong performers. I'm happy to give them referrals on LinkedIn or be references on their interviews and speak to their next hiring manager and put in a good word. I really do the suggestion of positioning the team better. And I think this is something that Louis brought up in the last season as well, where not just doing the work, but making some noise as well. And this holds true not for individuals, but for teams as well, and making sure that there is visibility around what your team is doing and how they are contributing to the team's vision, or how they line up with the OKR set out as a broader organization, right? That, again, that doesn't guarantee that your teams will be shielded, but at least they have a better chance of surviving the multiple rounds of layoffs. Go ahead, Thiago.
So regarding Vic's question, right? What can managers do? I feel that is the kind of like proactive, more preventive aspect. And I think on that side, the best thing a manager can do is be brutally honest and prepare people and give as much feedback as they can, give them as much challenges as they can, and make sure that have conversations about such things as emergency funds, about maybe skill-wise, what is more attractive based on what they're seeing that people do on the day-to-day, what kind of role they're going to succeed, right? Because the manager usually has a perspective that's different than the one that the person has, right? But I think, like, on the remediation side, I think is exactly like referrals, introduced to the network. But I think, in my view, that's already too late. The best thing is have those conversations, give those feedback, prepare those people so they can take any job and they can switch roles, give the opportunities if they're using like a technology that is gonna go away, like to maybe have time or have opportunities to learn something else. I think that's the best thing a manager can do, right? Because if they have people that are well prepared and really well-rounded, they're gonna be successful whenever they go.
I think you sort of hear this advice a lot right now, where people say, you want to shield your people and all of that, right? This is where it could really bite you, right? Because if you've been not giving them, if you've been shielding them, and as a manager, you're usually a lot more clued in to the business, right? Because most ICs are just heads down writing code. They're not necessarily super focused, although they should be. They're not super focused on the business numbers, what's being reported out there. So managers are usually far more in tune. I mean, even just getting approvals for headcount or whatever, you see that drying up as a manager, you got to be clued in that something bad's happening, right? And so, there's a sequence of things, and the managers that don't tell people, how they're performing or whatever, because, I don't know, maybe you don't want to deliver the bad news because times have been good for a long time. You're really doing sort of doing them a disservice, right? Because now it's going to be hard for them to land something else potentially. Meanwhile, they could have been improving. So I think that's, this is the problem with management, right? You're kind of in this, tough situation where you might not even know this is all coming. You've been doing your best to help people. You feel like you've been doing your best. And then it turns out, sort of maybe it wasn't so good.
Agreed, Louis. I think skilling up always helps, no matter what cycle of layoffs or what the industry is. I personally know quite a few people that are either in the legacy banking industry or even in the telecom industry where they still have to deal with mainframes and code that hasn't been touched or people are scared to touch for years and years, right? And now from you being the subject matter expert or the lead, but that's the only thing it's going to be very hard to find your next gig because you don't have the appropriate skill set. Yes, you are an expert, but that technology is long outdated, right? Go ahead, Vic.
I very recently heard from this person on Twitter where they talked about how they were the leading expert at their entire company on this stack that is used only at their company. They were such an expert at it. And when the company did layoffs, they suddenly found themselves in a job market that is so far away from their skill set that it's almost like they are starting absolutely from scratch. This is one of those things where you have to take care of yourself. You find yourself only working on COBOL. I mean, yeah, it pays the bills today, but if tomorrow, your company decides, all right, we're going to adopt the new hotness, it doesn't even have to be the new hotness, right? It can be the thing that's 5 years old instead of the thing that's 30 years old. You're going to find yourself out of a job because you've not been taking care of your skills. But, not to digress.
I think similarly, I recall interviewing folks for engineering positions who have been at one company for the last 10 or 15 years. And I know, in layoffs, if you've been somewhere, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the tons of posts from Googlers who, I've been at Google for 15 plus years or 10 plus years, and I'm so surprised and I don't really know what to do. I think that if you haven't been expanding your network and your skill set that whole time, that's putting yourself at a disservice. It's not to say you shouldn't be at a company for that long, but you shouldn't make that your whole identity and your whole skill set, like Vic was saying. And I think we're going to start seeing that a lot. So I would say if there's anything to prepare yourself for, it's to diversify what you can offer and make sure that anything that you've done, even when you speak to your accomplishments, it's not too tied to that one company. I think we see that a lot with FAANGs, right? They'll say, I built this really great feature, but it's within Amazon's code base and Amazon's pipelines, and you only know how to write and build code within one company's infrastructure. So you want to be preparing yourself by doing some side projects or maybe interviewing when you don't need to really understand what it's like to build and work outside of your company. Tiago, go ahead.
Amazing. I was going to push back on Vic's point about internal frameworks because I don't feel that internal frameworks are the problem. I think it's like mostly the laziness around the people that are using it and don't really understand what's going behind the scenes, right? Because I mean, if you're like a curious, good engineer, you actually, okay, I'm using this framework, but how is that doing, I don't know, SSL? How is that working like behind the scenes? And you're actually getting deeper and deeper there to avoid be operating blindly at the level that you don't know how things are working, right? But I would say that the second biggest problem after that, like people that don't really go deep on the tech stack and try to understand how things are actually happening, is what Mitra mentioned. Is like if you are in a company, a role for more than 3 years, you're probably in trouble, right? If you're using the same set of technology for 3-5 years on the same company, on the same business area, on the same kind of domain with the same people. You're almost working for the government. You're either you have the job forever or you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. So to harp on this point, I mean, I really think sort of, I love to rail on big tech, right? Because they kind of deserve it. I mean, FAANG, but just big tech in general, they've really sort of set people up for, pain, right? In a lot of ways, because let me tell you, they feed these people, they give them massages, right? They pay them great salaries, which that part's a good thing. But when you're used to being in the office until 8 p.m. because you're getting dinner there, I mean, you've seen these TikToks, these videos, right? You're getting all these things. You're not even pulling money out of your pocket. It's setting these completely unreasonable expectations about what it's like to work in the real world. And then you add on top of this proprietary stack, right? Which, okay, these people are smart people. I'm sure they could figure out something else. But like in a lot of domain heavy mid-level firms, they just look at, do you match these requirements or not? Oh, you got some random thing that you guys use inside your company. That's not helpful to me. I need Kafka and Java. You have that, and you don't have that because you've been using some queuing system that they invented in there. And so in a lot of ways, I kind of feel like big tech has set these people and they fatten them up, right? Just to slaughter them like turkeys, right? That's what they did to them. They set them up for this wonderful world that just doesn't exist. It would have been much better if they sort of kept their instincts sharp, right? Told them the real truth that this is a job and you could be fired at any point in time. If things go, haywire, we're going to let you go. They didn't say any of that. I mean, I'm seeing posts from wonderful people from Google, and it's just, and the other thing that I sort of not to go off on a sort of tangent is that there's a lack of empathy from the rest of the industry because they view these people, look, they've been getting paid well. So why are we even worried about them, right? But the truth is a lot of these people moved to these cities for these companies, these very expensive cities. So all the money just kind of went to that lifestyle, right? Living in New York or living in California, and the homes are $2-3 million. And so they don't actually, these people, some of them could be on the street because there were studies on this that people were making 250 grand and they felt like they had no money. Everything was going out because it's literally that expensive to live in these cities. And it's the way that these companies have set it up. So to be entirely dependent on them. And then when things go really bad. And so it's very frustrating to see all of this happen. You definitely feel for these people, right? 17 years at Google, they gave their whole life to the firm. I mean, they did. Their book is written through Google. Their research paper is written through Google. They were fed by Google. They were going into the office at 5 a.m. And then they showed up and they can't get in anymore. The door's locked and no one told them anything. And it's just a sort of terrible scenario all around. And big tech deserves tons of blame. I mean, tons of blame. They really messed this up, and they messed up sort of generation of techies, I feel, because a lot of these people don't think about these things. They don't think about survival in this manner and like this. I mean, some of them do, I guess. I mean, especially the immigrants probably, but I'm an immigrant. So for me, this stuff was top of mind. Mithra, jump in.
Yeah, just on that note, I think I've always been a little skeptical again of how especially big tech is like everything is free, and even startups, right? It's so amazing that you raise some money and you spend all of it now on recruiting people with all your fancy benefits and perks and to be able to offer those things. We've definitely, like you said, Louis, spoiled a generation of techies. And I think it's weird, but tech became an industry that was seen as like a get rich quick type of place. And instead of, you need to be super smart, super hardworking. And if you're lucky in that 1%, your startup will succeed. And that's the truth, right? But for some reason, that message was lost when you saw all of the comp packages and benefits that people were getting for doing any sort of job in a tech company, and for doing maybe half the job, right? Like they didn't have to work so hard and you're still getting all these benefits. And like we said in the beginning, you have to be performing well enough and you can skirt on by. I honestly think this is just like a long overdue correction. Again, it's going to sound harsh, but I think it's a long overdue correction to really help people identify, do you actually enjoy the work? Do you actually enjoy software engineering or building products? Then yeah, you're going to have to slog, and it's not going to just come to you and you're not just going to get all this money, but you have to prove that you and your company and your product deserve to be making money, and then you'll make the money. But it's become this place of, I don't know how many people listening to this are on TikTok, but I see these like day in the life TikTok videos all the time of, my day as a PM at Google or Facebook or whatever. And it's like Louis was saying, like getting all the free food and your meetings, for like maybe 3 hours and like doing a little bit of work, but it's just become this like oversimplified, like fantasized world. And we're just getting back to the roots of it almost. Tiago, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Louis mentioned about being an immigrant, right? So I have been in the US for 9 years, and for the first 7 years I was on H-1B visa, and if I was let go, I had pretty much 90 days to get a job, otherwise I'm going to be deported, right? So I think the part of that mindset was that constant reminder that I had: you are not a citizen, you're going to get in trouble. You need, and I needed to cover from all sides, right? And the financially was the first side. Then maybe apply visa to a different company, try green card application for this, to be able to cover 360 what would happen with me and my family here. But I think most people that are in those big techs are not immigrants. I think a huge majority, right? They don't even think that this is ever going to end, right? And I think is the Turkey story that Louis was mentioning, that kind of one day everything ends. But I think it reminds me, what's happening now reminds me of the WeWork story. And back like maybe in 2000, when was that? 2009? No, 2019, 2018, when WeWork was like at its peak. I had a friend who was engineering manager there. I remember grabbing coffee with him, and he was telling me, because it was the first time that he was working on a big tech, he was telling me like, man, you're not going to believe there are people on my team that go to the office, stay the whole day doing massages, go to even different buildings, and I don't get to see that. And I was like, what the fuck? And that kind of, because I had never seen that kind of culture. And that was basically people that WeWork was trying to steal from big tech to attract them. And I think the maybe the reason why we got here, and if you go back 20 years in time, it was the competition for talent, right? And people had to start to go one more crazy than the other, everything they could do to get their employees there. And I think we end up on this kind of like kindergarten, right? As they say, like, where we're going there to play, not to work here.
Yeah, I think that's great points that you guys bring up, and I've seen this firsthand. So maybe let's shift gears and go into where to from here, right? So like we said, so there's over 130,000 people that are now flooding the job market, right? Do we think that, so obviously all of these guys are highly qualified. They've obviously managed not just to get past the grueling interviews that big tech puts them through, but they have the experience, they have the names of these big techs on their resume, which obviously, if nothing else, at least gets you an interview with other companies. How easy do we think it's going to be for folks to find their next job? Do you think a compensation cut is in order? Or do you think other companies will be able to rise and say, okay, we will give you similar compensation, either front-loaded as signing bonus or back-loaded as RSUs, to try and lure some of this talent to their companies, right? And then maybe we'll get to the differences between seniors and juniors after, but just given the saturation of the market, this is something I've seen as well, because I do hire, and I've been hiring for quite some time. Even last year, I think after summer, it was very common for candidates to have multiple offers and negotiate during the offer stage, right? Saying, this is what I have, what's the best you can offer? And very often they did not take the offers that they had, even if it was marginally better elsewhere, then that's where they would go, because they had that option, right? Now it's definitely, tables have turned, and even getting a single offer is hard because there are multiple candidates with a lot more experience applying for the same job. So any advice on what folks can expect or next steps? Go ahead, Vic.
I think you're absolutely right? This is totally a supply and demand problem, right? We have an excess supply in the market, and you have a lot of people applying for very limited jobs, because not only are there all these people that are applying, it's all of these various places have freezing hires in place, and they can hire, 1, 2, 3 people when previously, they would have needed to hire 50 or 60 people. Everyone's tightening their belt. So you have that issue. And when you have that issue, it's not a buyer's market or something like that anymore, right? You're not able to make the same kind of demands that you used to be able to 6 months ago. I know that because I was on the job market 6 months ago, and it was a completely different market. And it is going to make people a lot more wary of making demands or pushing back on negotiations, because that there are 10 other people that are fighting for the same job. And you're absolutely going to get a pay cut. And you're going to get a pay cut because companies know they don't have to pay as much. They just don't. I mean, going through the pipeline, they have so many more competent candidates than they previously had. I mean, all these people that have these domain expertise in running, I don't know, Kafka or whatever that, that Twitter fired, they're all competing for other similar jobs at other places. So that's one thing, right? And I think this market is going to be different. This market is going to be very different looking forward, because I think there's also kind of this activist interest in reducing stock-based compensation. So I don't know if this is going to affect base salaries yet, but it's certainly going to affect stock-based compensation, because that's mostly what, a lot of investors are looking at, about how it dilutes their share pool the more of these shares you keep handing out when you're hiring these big tech folks. And well, let's see, the one other point I was going to make was around, and this market is going to be different for whether you're a junior or a senior engineer. A lot of companies are slowing down their hiring of junior engineers. One, because they don't have the bandwidth to dedicate to training junior engineers. And two, they can get a lot of senior engineers at a bargain than they used to be able to. So they're looking at it as, oh, I can hire you and then have to invest resources in training you, or I can hire a senior engineer for pretty close to your pay and a little bit more. And they're desperate enough, if they've been on the market for so many months, that they want to come join me. Mitra, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think we haven't seen it yet, like the pay cuts, the intense like competition. I think we're starting to see it. What I will say is this is a really good time if there is, an idea or two you've been wanting to try, or there is a specific technology that you're really interested in and you feel like you can get really good at. This is a good time to take a few months and maybe work on that on the side if you can, if you still have, your job going on the side, and really sharpen up your resume with that. But I think that will also open the door for you for roles if maybe you previously wouldn't have been considered, because I think, like we said earlier, companies are going to be looking for specific jobs to be done right now, not necessarily to fill a role with a certain level of engineer. So if you are, a React wizard and you can build web apps like nobody's business, and you're a junior engineer, a company that wants someone who's building and maintaining web apps would probably go for you over a senior front-end engineer, who's like kind of familiar. So I think this reminds me of, I wasn't in the workforce at this time, but hearing the horror stories of, the .com bubble burst and all that, this is when you really, like, good ideas really rise to the top, and people who can solve problems, like specific problems really well, end up doing okay, basically. Tiago?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would mention is we are seeing some kind of roles that don't have a direct business impact. For example, agile coaches or technical program TPM roles, right? Getting cut too. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is if you're working across a lot of different departments or a lot of different areas, but you don't have, let's say, a direct business impact, you're driving yourself, I think you would be better off prepared if you try to position yourself to a role where you're driving a particular kind of impact, really nail down. And I think that might help a lot to the point that you made about problem solving. I think at the end of the day, it's all about problem solving on areas that will get some clear direct impact. But yeah,
So, I mean, I don't necessarily share the opinion on the bleakness. Maybe because I don't know, but I sort of feel like 2022, right? Just summer of 2022, there was maybe a shortage of about 500,000. Not joking, 500,000 juniors in the industry. The catch is the roles paid about 70,000. Okay, so that tells you like that tells you where the industry's at, right? And that tells you where the industry's at with juniors and so on. The industry's been starving for tech talent for a long time, right? And big tech has had its pick of the litter. I mean, let's be frank, they just sort of plucked the very best and they put them in and handcuffed them for years and put them to the side. But the rest of the industry, I mean, I remember at Walmart how difficult it was for me to hire, right? And it was hard to hire because, I mean, even though we were very competitive, we paid as well as Google, and our margins are not even close at Walmart, right? Like, it's a retail business. The margins are razor thin. Google has insane margins. It's just software, right? There isn't, you're not buying apples and selling apples. And it's a so they, and we were still competing in terms of compensation with them, right? Because we needed the talent that badly. And the thing is, I think companies like Walmart, domain heavy. I mean, you talk about it, pharmacy, for example, very domain heavy. The technology aspects of it, the scale. I mean, the scale at Walmart's pretty big, but there's a lot of domain complexity, and there's a lot of mid-tier firms like that, right? Banks, you name it. That has been starving. I mean, for years, because big tech just ripped out the best talent right underneath them, and they just couldn't compete, right? And it's not just, I mean, it's startups, it's numerous companies that need technology today. And also, my gut feeling is that long term, the world's only going to get out of this with more technology. It's going to be very difficult to get out of this rut, this economic rut, especially if we sort of look at the big picture of, there's reduced efficiency globally because there's less globalization, there's less trade. So what does that mean? So you need to become more efficient somehow. Well, you're not going to become more efficient with pen and paper. I mean, I'll tell you that. And so I think what's going to happen is, you're going to see a lot of these mid-tier firms hiring. Unfortunately, when it comes to the compensation, a lot of these firms have never been able to afford the big tech salaries, but they can still pay, they can still pay, right? They can still pay well. And so I think the trade-offs now for a lot of engineers are going to be, do you move out of San Francisco into some really cheap area, take maybe a 25-30% cut. You still have a very nice job, fully remote, and you still, maybe, you reduce your lifestyle a little bit. Those are going to be the kind of trade-offs that people need to make now, I think, going forward. But I just generally think long-term, the prospects for engineers are still very strong. Even on the junior side, frankly. I mean, I know junior's a lot tougher, but you're just going to end up taking a little bit less money and sort of doing whatever you have to do to get your foot in the door. But, there's a lot of firms, man. I mean, Walmart's still hiring, right? If you're okay, we're working there. My old teams are still, as far as I know, they don't have a hiring freeze. I mean, I saw one of my managers that reported up to me just a few weeks ago. He posted something on LinkedIn, I'm hiring. And, this is the point, right? Like, there's going to be a lot of firms like that, are still, trucking along. Walmart's business, the worse the economy gets, the better they're going to do. More people are going to shop at Walmart, right? And so, there's going to be a lot of businesses like that, right? That just can't pay those salaries. But, the work is still super interesting, and you could make a good living. Vic, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We keep talking about big tech so often, right? But there's this whole other market. I mean, there's the technology companies and they're the technology enabled companies. And the technology enabled companies are going to see more and more people, like really good candidates, come to them. What I do wonder, though, is that with their increased supply that they're starting to see. Oh, by the way, you talked about moving somewhere with much lower cost of living and all that. North Carolina is really nice this time of year. Just going to throw that out there. But you're going to see salaries shifting across the industry, right? Like, remote work has really taken off. I mean, remote work is not new, but it's really taken off in the last 2 years where people are able to work from just about everywhere. Even though a lot of these companies are doing return to office, there are plenty more that are saying we're never doing that again. We're doing great. This is allowing us to hire from all across the country, but it does mean that you, a San Francisco or you, a New York senior engineer, is competing with someone living in Idaho or North Carolina. So we are going to start seeing salaries start to shift a little lower. And I don't know what that means exactly, for all these other industries as well. Yeah, Mitra?
Yeah, I will say just to that last point, I think I've also been seeing some companies who don't want to do remote work really double down on in person. So if that's something that's interesting to you, they're kind of limiting their pool of applicants with that, and also limiting, questions about salary and benefits and whatever else that they have to provide. So I think that's another opportunity to kind of look out for. I know, for example, at a recent company, I think it was our director of engineering, he left this, big tech remote job to be the CTO at a local candle company, I think it was, and they needed, someone to manage their tech stack, and they did online orders. So I think there's a lot of like local businesses too, and not to say, you have to go to a small business, but there's a lot of great local shops, like software engineering companies that need engineers and need, engineering leaders. And maybe we've been overlooking it all this time. Everyone's been looking at startups in specific cities and big tech, but this might be the time where you maybe shift back to looking to your, immediate area.
Yeah, I don't know if I entirely agree about the remote work. I know maybe a couple of years ago, and even last year, there was a large disproportionate increase in the number of remote job postings that I was finding. But a lot of companies are now forcing employees to come back into the office, whether it's to recoup their money on real estate, whether it is to force people to collaborate, whether it's to have sparks or ideas kick off, whatever their reasoning is. But not most companies that I have looked at are either enforcing hybrid or full-time back to the office, like COVID never happened, right? So again, if you are looking for a job, maybe it's a great question to even start with the HR or recruiting partner and check what is the expectation, and not just presently if they have plans to go back into the office in 3 months, 6 months, or a year. To Vic's point, some people are very vocal about it, very clear that we are never going to go to the office, we are 100% remote. But there are others that will be forced to go back despite the high cost of living area, right? So again, in that case, you want to make sure that aligns with what you want to do and where you want to work. So one of the other areas I wanted to jump into was interviewing. How should you address a layoff in your interview? Should you be honest and bring up the fact that you were part of a mass layoff? Some of the big ones other companies might have heard of, right? Like the Salesforce and Amazon and Google's, those might be, but there are plenty of smaller companies that not everyone is aware of what their domain is, how big they are, or the fact that they laid off a percentage of their workforce, right? Which meant you could be the highest performer, but they just got rid of the whole org based on finances or what have you. So what's the best way to position yourself as a strong candidate without a job and still try and have some leverage during your interview or during your negotiation? Mitra, do you want to go?
Yeah, sorry, I'll jump back in here. So I went through this situation. I was part of a layoff last year, so before it was trendy, and had to, re-interview about it. And it honestly, the reason why I left didn't come up in the interviews. You end up just talking about your work, right? And if you were at a place for a short amount of time, they might ask what happened. And I think honesty is the best policy, especially the more senior you are. They're going to do background checks, they're going to do reference checks, like they're going to find out if you're lying. So I wouldn't lie, and don't be defensive about it. Don't be like angry about it. Just, be truthful and say, I was part of layoffs, but and then take it back to the work you did, especially if you're like a high performer and you were just laid off and no reason why. There's no reason to feel like shameful about it or hide it, I think. Tiago?
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much the same thing. The only thing I would add is I was going to say, don't advertise it on your resume, but if that comes up on an interview, be honest about it. But as you said, Mitra, focus on the work, focus on the impact you had, focus on what you're doing and what you're looking to do next. I think that's more important than layoffs are normal. I mean, you can't predict, right? I mean, and it doesn't mean low performance as we discussed. So it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Agreed. I think there are a lot of interviews still happening, so that's good news. There are still plenty of companies that need talent, so you still have a lot of room to practice. So even if you don't get your first gig, that's fine. Don't be disheartened. Continue applying, continue interviewing, and something will click. It may not be the tech stack you're used to. It may not be a well-known company that you're used to. It may not be the compensation that you're used to, but something will line up, something will click. There's definitely reason to be hopeful, as there are plenty of jobs out there. It's just a harder time for a lot of folks, and we do empathize with everyone that is looking for a job right now, especially given the scale. But things are going to look up and things will get better. Did we have any closing thoughts or areas that we wanted to jump into? Go ahead, Louis.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I basically just want to say, sort of stick to your principles when you're going for one of these new roles. If you want to be remote, don't let these companies bully you to go into an office. There's still plenty of remote jobs. I think the boat's already sailed on that, but I have strong opinions on this, that I think generally it's going to be really hard to turn the tide back and let, so I guess my advice is, you might have to bend on money. Okay. That's the one thing, especially in this interest rate environment where money has become really expensive. That's the one thing you might have to bend on. But I don't think you should bend on anything else, basically. And if you're willing to bend on the money, that should get you something. That should get you these other things that you really care about, whether it's the remote work, whether it's, a transition into a management role, whether, whatever it is, right? New experience with some new technology. There's numerous things that you can use this as an opportunity to learn and get ahead. Because, hard times don't last, right? Just hard people do. And so, you're going to get on the other side of this and hopefully even stronger than you were before. So I don't think you should bend on the things that matter to you most. You might have to bend on the money. And my advice is, look, we work in tech. We still make really good money. You could, there are ways you could start a side project, make a few dollars and make up for your compensation. If you really care about money, that's probably a better way to do it at this point in time than fight in a sort of, in a competitive environment over money. But I think you can stick to your guns on a lot of other things that you care about. And so, yeah, so that's my sort of parting thoughts. I mean, I wish people the best in this environment, but yeah, I think you should stick with what you want. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I actually want to ask a question to you all here. What are your thoughts around doing some kind of freelancing or small bets, especially to learn new technology, to uplift your skills while you're interviewing? What are the general perception of that, like at this time?
I mean, absolutely do it. I mean, you have no risk from doing this. It is going to only expand your skill set. And even if you don't get laid off, this is the sort of thing that's going to help you stay fresh in the industry, keep up with all the skills that you need to do. I mean, when I was doing little side projects at, 2 companies ago, and I was able to use that skill to really get my next job when I was ready for it. And I don't think that is ever going to serve you poorly to, keep learning and not ever become irrelevant. I mean, become irreplaceable, right? But, if you do have to leave a company, you have these additional skill sets to fall back on.
I agree. I think I've been on both sides of that fence. If you have any side project, you are able to speak to them. They might come up in casual conversation with the interviewer, and that might completely change the game. I've been on both sides, so maybe I'll speak to the interviewer side. So I was an interviewer, and there was this new grad right out of school, and he had found a way to game the Twitter algorithm with some sort of bot. I don't know if it was entirely kosher or legal the way he was gaming it, but it showed interest. It showed passion, which was different from the other candidates who just had textbook knowledge, right? And same as an interviewee, I was able to speak to things I was doing on the side, which had nothing to do with my day job, but it still sparked a conversation and brought up a common interest that led to me getting the job, right? So I 100% recommend it. If you're doing the side hustle just to stay passionate because you're curious, because you're trying to make a few dollars on the side, I would say go for it. There is no downside to that.
Oh, be aware of whether your company, permits this, because some places, actually, specifically a lot of big tech places, will not let you do this on company time or on the company laptop. You ever seen the show Silicon Valley? you should know that you should not be doing any of these on your company laptop because those become company property.
Just another way that big tech is ruining people, right? But but just real quick, I mean, talking about the whole small bets thing, right? Like, we're doing a podcast right now. We're thinking of getting sponsors for this podcast, right? And so, when you think about the small bets approach, and what I love about the concept is that you don't need to just go and build software. You can build a whole different set of skills, right? Like you can build communication skills. You can do an info product. You can, I don't know, you can start a newsletter. You can learn to write better. Whatever it is that you kind of want to improve on, I urge you to think out of the box on this one. I don't think your employer is going to be able to say anything if you start a newsletter. Okay, if you're building software, they might say something. But so I think that you got a lot of options as an engineer. Your asset stack and things that you can use is quite deep, but probably you're just thinking in labels and you're kind of going in there and saying, I'm just, all I can do is solve for it. No, I mean, you could do a lot of things, right? I mean, we're doing a podcast. So, just think about that. I'd say.
Love the advice. So I know we covered a lot in today's episode, and there was some great advice shared by the panelists. So stay positive, have the right mindset, pick something that lines up with your value system, right? If money is what you're after and that's the phase of life you're in, pick the one that gives you the highest compensation, right? If you are looking for a job that is remote or gives you more time with your family, then pick that job. Build an emergency fund, like Thiago pointed out, that's at least 3 to 6 months. Do some small bets, some side projects, start a podcast, start a book, whatever you want. None of these are bad ideas. So I wanted to thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.